Welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud,
And I'm Mark Gelwicks.
and today we're talking about BYOD, bring your own device.
Uh-oh, we've gone slow. I don't know if I've lost Augusto or not. He's been dealing with some technology issues before this. Um, as we all know, internet can be difficult at times. So today's topic: bring your own device. Bring your own device is one of those strategies that has evolved over the past number of years, allowing you to literally do just that, supplying your own technology in the workplace. And it's one of those things that has, I want to say, a mixed bag that goes along with it. There are a lot of people who love the convenience of bringing your own piece of hardware or your own technology to the forefront, um, using the tools that you're very comfortable with on a daily basis to get your work done. There are significant drawbacks, though, as well, especially from an IT side of the equation. And when you're dealing with a cross platform environment, you're dealing with an environment that has some unpredictability to the technology that's involved. This can really introduce some problems. So let's talk about this first. Why is BYOD even a thing? If we think about most business environments, especially if they have IT groups, the IT groups typically have mandated what the technology is that would be used at the company or the business. They control how it's deployed, how it's configured, what it's connected to, what you can load, what you can't load or can't uninstall. All of that is a factor when IT looks at something because their job is really just to keep the lights on. They need to keep things running, and consistency allows that to happen. If you know what the hardware is, you know what the software is, you know how things work, you have a much greater chance of maintaining a stable, consistent environment. You have a much better chance of protecting your environment against vulnerabilities and external attacks and security challenges or physical challenges. So, with all that being said, one of the things that we've started to see over the past several years, and it's becoming more and more frequent, is people pushing on businesses to say, hey, I want to use my own stuff. I want to use my own machine. I've seen it frequently over the years. One of the common areas I've seen it is when you're dealing with graphic design. You may have a company that's completely a Windows centric company, but yet the graphic design team many times was trained and raised and educated on Macs. So they want those tools available to them to be able to work on. Well, with that in mind, the IT department has to then dedicate some resources to say, okay, either we'll supply that equipment, which is their normal approach. We will provide the support, the maintenance, the care and feeding thereof, or we'll let you use your own equipment within these guidelines. And then they have to define a very specific set of parameters to determine how that equipment's going to work. Hey, he's back.
And he's back. I internet connection died, and I was unable to do anything about it.
Not a problem. I'm just laying out the basic premise as to how BYOD came about in workplaces as it's evolved over time. So when you have this environment where you have mixed purposes, again, like a graphic arts team or a video editing team, somebody who wants to use an alternative platform to the default standard, you have that choice. You either supply it for them and you take on all that care and feeding and maintenance, or you allow them to bring their tools into your environment. In either case, There are positives and there are negatives. From the user standpoint, if it's my stuff, I know how it works. I'm very comfortable with it. Theoretically, I am more productive and I am more efficient with that equipment. From a user standpoint, though, however, there are significant drawbacks from this as well. From a company environment, I don't have to specifically deploy someone or purchase hardware for these edge case scenarios. But the drawback is I no longer control that equipment. I no longer control the integrity of my environment innately because I have limited exactly what can go into it.
Mhm.
So when we think about something big like computers and that sort, that's usually a more aggregated or aggravated discussion. But the more frequent thing I think we see now is we see the introduction of phones into an environment where you would have Blackberries issued, where you would have, older cell phones issued by a company or by a business, and that's your work phone, and you'll use your work phone. More and more and more people are using their personal device as their work device as well. And I think this is where, as we start to talk through this is where this can really become a bigger and bigger issue for people because of what I've seen as some of the drawbacks of that, but also some of the benefits. What do you think?
Well, there is a couple of issues, okay, and I have seen this on both sides of the spectrum. And on the spectrum talking about is the geek, okay, and the non-geek, the person who don't care about technology but now get work and their personal phone is an iPhone and they get at work an Android, for example. And there is nothing wrong with either platform. It's just, well, one is comfortable, used to, and they now want to go and use or prefer to use their personal phone because it's familiar, nothing other than that. Or my case, I love to work in the iPad. So every time I have a new client and I need to get into their system, that's the first thing. Hey, how you're going to make my iPad inside of your system? Because I prefer to work on the iPad. And there are two things to look into that. One is the admin perspective. Okay. And I understand from the admin perspective, I don't want you to bring your own device. I want you to issue a standard. Everybody has the same device. So I don't need to struggle about it. Okay. And it's not a struggle in the sense the IT guy don't want to do it. Is depending the size of the company, that person is doing tech support, hardware, and all that for 100, 200 devices. You don't have the time to think on all the nuances of each device that everybody can bring. And the second part is from the user. When you get a user, someone say technically capable, no problem. They will figure it out 99% of the problems. Then you don't need to worry about it. The problem is the user who is not necessarily that technically capable and want to bring their device. And now, as a company, you need to provide that support. And I have seen now more and more, even that I have seen an increasing of bring your device. One of the things I have seen is if you are allowed to bring your device, but we are not responsible for any support. If your device can connect,
Mhm.
don't connect, won't connect, not a problem. We only support the device that we issue. And I understand it. That is a response from the IT saying we cannot support that many devices. So the second big issue from the company perspective is where your data is. Yes, if you are a certain size, then you can secure your data, you secure your device, you install profiles, and then in case of something happen, you can come in and wipe out a lot. But from a smaller company, well, that's now a problem because you may not have all that infrastructure to do those kind of things. So you get now into, okay, do I'm going to let the people bring their own device and put my data to a certain level in risk or not? Because that is a big concern, at least in my opinion, from the bring your own device. So, and then you get the annoying users. Okay. And by the way, when I said that, I'm raising my hand. I am one of those annoying users. Okay. Because not only I bring my own device, I want to bring multiple devices. Okay. I don't want to connect your network with one. I want to connect with your network on every device that I have. So I am the annoying user who call IT and then they need to, well, but our policy is fine. What is their policy? Well, two devices, one phone and one tablet. Great. Now let me find out how I'm going to get that overturned so I can bring the other thing. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot. Okay. But that's part of the game. Those limits come for a reason, because otherwise, not only license wise, but maintenance wise, then if
Mhm.
you let every user, you have 100 users and every user bring two devices, that's now 200 devices. Okay. Plus the one you issue, that's 300 devices. If you issue them a phone, now you are managing 400 devices. And that's a nightmare, period. Because if you don't have the manpower to that, then you are in trouble. And that's from the company perspective. Now we can go and talk about the user perspective, unless you want to extend something else on the
Well,
company perspective, where I know you have managed, I haven't managed, but you have that fun
there's
part.
yeah, there are some things I do wanna visit with this because if you're an independent, if you're in a very small organization that does not have a dedicated IT team, these are things that you should be aware of that could be issues that your IT teams in mid to large size organizations are aware of intimately. One of them is the natural instinct, if you have a device that is just completely not behaving, is very problematic in a large IT group. You'll rebuild and reformat that device, take it back to factory defaults, reconfigure it, give it back to that person. They're off and running. You can't do that with someone's personal device. You can't take it and wipe it and restart it. You don't have that as a troubleshooting option. Um, Even to the extent where if you start to troubleshoot problems with just company applications and you lose someone's personal data, now you have a greater problem because you have to have either ironclad policies in place and agreements in place to say, look, I'm going to troubleshoot this and it blows up. There is nothing I can do about that. Or on the flip side, you wind up with a bunch of stuff that has to be installed on that person's personal device to create almost a sandbox. You get a virtual environment, you get secure segmentation within many of the devices. You have to have a VPN installed in many cases. There's a lot of stuff in there to create the equivalent of a device that's not actually a dedicated separate device. You can have conflicts between applications. I've actually troubleshot problems where somebody will say, hey, I have Microsoft Teams on my phone and my camera won't work. Well, it's because there's some other app on that phone that's controlling the camera all the time. So the apps are conflicting. In a defined IT environment where you can say this is what's allowed and this is what is not allowed, then yeah, you have the ability to know exactly what's causing the problem. In a bring your own device in situation, you don't have it. And you as the device owner then becomes that IT team. Data accessing, you mentioned it right there. What data is available from that person's individual device? Well, what happens if you lose that device? One of the reasons why those dedicated secure segments are set up, especially on the Android side, um, is because you can remotely kill them. You can disable that connectivity. But if it's not set up the same way, if it's set up in a very loose or free environment, well, now you have a problem because you can't remotely kill it off. You have to shut down different things in the back end. You have to be prepared for the loss of those devices and their data. And there's other things we can get into, like work-life separation. Are you in a place where you're allowed to get work emails 24/7? I mean, there's countries in the world where that's actually illegal now,
Correct.
um, which I think is probably not a terrible thing. But if it's on your personal device, are you going to have that control? Um, your browser-based software, and the one that I don't think anybody really takes into consideration until it happens is if you should have to get into a situation where you have a legal freeze or a legal hold on business or company documentation, they can seize your device. If they can't lock it down and they can't lock the information, it is conceivable they could seize your device as part of an
Correct.
investigation. Well, that's your personal device, not a company device. So, that all being said, from a business standpoint, I think it's just the type of thing that we need to be cognizant of, not saying that this is all the reasons why to not do it, but just be prepared that these are all issues that could come up if we're doing our own, bringing your own device. Now, I'm curious, we keep talking about installing stuff and things like that. Let's take something broader. Let's take something like web-based applications. We're talking about bringing your own device, but if we spread this out a little bit further, what if I have a web-based application that I want to use at work or for work? Is that okay? It may be the app I use. I'll use the example. I use Notion all the time. Every company that I've ever worked at, though, I can guarantee I would not be able to use Notion at those companies
Correct.
because of information protection policies. Smaller organizations, independents, don't have the same types of policies and the same level of rigor. So when you look at it, and I'm going to throw it at you with iPads, because I think iPads are just as a big thing in this area. Um, what do you do? What kind of guidelines and guide do you give people about using things like iPads for their work and person on the same device?
So number one, let me approach the part of using that device. Let me approach the part of mixing that personal and professional part and first. So if you are not comfortable with that, then you should not mix them. Okay. And don't think, oh, well, I will do it only in this device. No, no, no. That's a bad idea. So if you are the kind of people who have hard time with boundaries between your personal, or you want to have them, you don't have a hard time, but you want to have them, then bring your own device is not for you, and be clear on that one. Okay. And my wife is an example of that. My wife do very well, okay, with having her work and her personal devices, but she don't do very well mixing them because she likes the separation. She like to be able to walk away and grab her phone and do her personal things without that thing beeping. And when beeps, she wants to go to the other device. So in those cases, don't think about bring your own device. It's a bad idea. Okay. In the case, like people like me who I work. Okay. I don't have a difference between personal, I work. Okay. And there are moments that at 2 p.m. I'm doing a personal stuff, and there are moments that at 7 p.m. I'm doing work. And I'm okay with that. And it's been doing that fine for many years. Then bring your own device, it works great. That said, you need to understand, one, what is your perspective about that? Two, what are you giving away when you bring your own device? Because I have worked with companies and clients who, well, they limit you and they lock you out into using Outlook, for example. Okay, so if they need to wipe out, they wipe out Outlook, their application. Okay, and that's it. They don't need to touch anything of your other device and other application, and it's fine. And I have worked with other clients where no, their profile, it says that basically they will almost take the hardware with them if something happened. You need to understand that and over time, companies are getting better and better to explain you, regular user, what they will be able to do or not do in your device. But you need to be very clear, because if you work in one of those companies who they will go and wipe out everything if you leave, well, that's your personal, okay? And they will have the ability to wipe out. And if you wipe out on one, it will spread. So be very aware of where is the company and what the company is doing and how the company is thinking about it. So that part, it's very, very critical and important to know what you're going to do. So the next component is, what are you going to use? Because as you said, yes, depending the organization, you could use notes, you could use, you know, Notion, you could use whatever.
Mhm.
But there are many other organizations, when you are agreeing that their information is only going to live in those approved applications. And you need to understand that if you decide to keep it in notes, okay, or you decide to open a Notions and put that, technically you are violating the agreement that you sign when you bring your own device. And there can be legal consequences to that. They may not, but they can be. So you need to be very, very aware of the risk you take when you do those kind of things. Because what happened if, that kind of information leaks now because it was on your device?
That's a great point. The fact of separation from an entity. I mean, if you've brought your own device and you're using it for X amount of time, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, working with a company or a business rather, and you leave that organization, you leave the relationship with that organization. Now most of the time, large organizations will have a very clear outline of this is what you have to do to get rid of all your stuff. Smaller ones don't have that typically because they don't think about it that far, but it does raise concerns. It does raise problems. If
Correct.
you have, let's say you're using something simple, you're using Apple Notes, and that's where you take notes of things, and you've gotten into the habit now of taking some meeting notes or some action item notes in Apple Notes. And that's great, but now what are you gonna do with it when you leave? How do you actually transfer that information back? And worst case, in sometimes you have to actually prove that you did that, which is really hard. How do you prove a negative? How do I prove that
Correct.
I don't have something? That becomes very problematic, and that's something to think about. Now, there are a lot of benefits. Again, you're not carrying around 2 devices. You're not carrying around extra equipment. You're using something that you're very familiar with. You have, in most cases, you have decent equipment that you like and you know is gonna work well, and that's the upside to having uh, that bring your own device mentality. But I still have to caution people, uh, if at all possible, especially if you're dealing with an established organization or company, use their equipment, use their software, play within the rules. You will find your life is much easier in the long run if you do play within the rules that are defined. Now, let's take an organization, though, that may not have rules defined. Let's take a small entity, a small to medium sized enterprise at under 50 people. Could be something where you don't have an IT group. You may have one guy or one woman who their job is to manage the IT and do 8 other things as well. Well, they're not going to have dedicated policies tied to these things. They're not going to have troubleshooting. They're not going to have preventive structures in place. So now when you say, hey, I want to put Teams on my phone so that I can attend calls when I'm out and about. Well, if I'm working remotely or working anywhere, that's a positive. That's an upside. Do I allow them to do that? Do we as an organization allow them to do that, to install this type of hardware or software on their hardware.
Mhm.
It's difficult. It is a very difficult thing that we have to think about. And I challenge professionals and I challenge small to medium sized businesses to not think, there's no way to say it. Don't defer on the side of safety. It's easy to say, look, it's hard, so we're not going to do any of it. That you lose the benefits then. You lose a lot of the capabilities. The best thing is to look at it in increments and say, where will they get the greatest benefit and the greatest enhancement to their efficiency, and let them do that. But they don't need to do everything. They don't have to have everything in hand. So if you think about like an end user, some of the things that they would want to be able to do, well, possibly see their email, most definitely see their calendar. I mean, that's
Mhm.
kind of a given across the board. Their task list, possibly be able to take notes. So if you look at that consolidated set, if you can provide that in a controlled environment, relatively controlled, um, you're in much better shape, because then they can look at it and say, oh, okay, this is good. Things like downloading documents. Is it necessary to download the documents to your phone? Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Somebody may argue, say, oh, I need this, I need this. Well, then go use your laptop. There will be lines in the sand that you have to draw for things to be reasonable, but you have to do that for yourself as well.
Mhm.
If you're an independent professional and you have client information, that's just as sensitive. And do you have client information on your personal phone, or are you carrying around two devices? Well, a lot of independents can't afford two devices, much less deal with maintaining and supporting two. So yeah, the stuff's going to be on there. So you have to think about, well, how is that going to be protected? Does that client that you have policies around what information can and can't come off their devices? Uh, all of that structure needs to be written down, especially if you're dealing with someone else's data. You need to have that understanding. Either you're writing it down and you're coming up with it, or they have it and you need to have a copy of it and have a deep understanding of it. Because in either case, if things go sideways, that's going to be your only defense.
Mhm.
So let me ask you this. In the situations where you have done bring your own device, one, what is the device that you've brought? And two, why did you feel the need to bring your own device?
Well, my iPad is normally the device because that is my main device, and I, bring bring the iPad because I will prefer to work on the iPad over every device. Even if you tell me as IT, I will only authorize you one device, is my iPad over my phone. But that is a very personal choice. Okay, I understand that I can do on the iPad things that most people will not imagine they can. It's not the capabilities, how I use the device. Okay. I have brought my Mac and installed virtual PC so I can run a faster PC than the PC. I'm guilty of this. I've been guilty of this all my professional life. As soon as I get a laptop, um, I go and check the model of the laptop, what is the maximum RAM, and buy it in Amazon. And
Mhm.
as soon as that thing upgraded, and when I get that laptop back, it goes with the maximum of RAM every time. As I explained to people, I see hardware in a very particular way, in the sense that I understand people think, well, that should be the responsibility of the company. Give me a laptop with more
Mhm.
hardware. I get it, but I also understand IT. IT need to deploy 200 machines, flat RAM. That
Mhm.
was the best way to get the price. It's not that they want to give you a machine with less RAM. It's that that thing is done in a standard way. Period. So that that said, I always try to have that. But mostly for me, I think has been iPads, iPhone, and the Mac. the Mac, especially on the early days of the iPad, when the iPad was not powerful enough um, to really stop using the Mac. These days, the iPads are, well, these days probably for more than these days, but today the iPads are, they have the same chipset as the MacBook. So I don't have any need. My issues may be software other than anything else. If I can run a virtual PC, okay, on a
Mm,
virtual Windows machine on my iPad, the day I can start doing that, I will not even need any of the other machines. And I know that's coming. It's not, again, this is not a capability issue. It's an Apple obtuse.
mhm,
It's the way Apple gets obtuse about certain things. And I said that as a person who likes software, but they they want to make sure that your experience is in a certain way, and the way to accomplish that is to limit certain things. I'm sure the people of Parallels have not released it in the iPad, not because they don't have the capabilities. So,
mhm.
but
That's actually a really big piece of this, and we hadn't really talked about it before. Virtualization and virtual machines are something that they've been around quite some time, but they've come really more into the forefront,
Mhm.
specifically because of, through the pandemic and all, having to provide remote access for so many people. Uh, it is much easier to provide, maintain, support, and remove remote access through virtual machines because literally all you need is a browser and a really good internet connection. And web connectivity is far and above what it used to be. So it is viable to do that.
Well,
I
and and it provides something wonderful from IT, and is I
Mhm,
have no support calls. I mean, not support calls on the hardware. They think the hardware is not your problem. You need to connect to
mhm.
me, and as you said, if I need to wipe out that thing, I can be wiped out and live in 3 seconds. And that cost wise is for a large company. It's We're talking about millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, when you look at organizations like Microsoft who are starting to look at how they can provide full Windows computers, I'm going to use air quotes around that, in a virtual space
Mhm.
for the general public rather than just at the enterprise level. That's a very powerful capability because now you can have a device. You can have, in some cases, even a Chromebook that's connecting through a browser to a virtual machine and work with the machine as if you were sitting right there. The upside from the organization standpoint is if they need to wipe that machine and restart it, anything like that, it doesn't exist. It's a software toggle. So that's a huge step in the right direction for them. For most small to medium-sized enterprises, for most professionals, having that kind of virtual computer isn't really an option in many cases at this time because of the infrastructure that's necessary on the back end and the technical acumen necessary to handle the care and feeding of such an environment.
Mhm.
But as we see that evolving forward more and more, and we see more and more organizations be able to leverage those virtual machines, yeah, I think it's going to become more and more pronounced. Um, I personally try to use, if I'm not using my machine for my work, my business machine. If I need to use something else, I will typically only use browser-based applications and browser-based connections. And the reason being is because if I can avoid downloading anything to a local drive, I
Right.
eliminate a lot of those concerns and questions. And again, things can be maintained in that environment. And that's when you look at systems like a Google Drive environment or the Google Workplace, or you look at Microsoft 365, where you can basically do all the application level work you would do on a local machine, but you can do it in the cloud because you're doing it basically on Microsoft's or Google's machines. That takes away a lot of that concern. As an IT person, all I have to do is make sure they have a secure connection and then they can use the virtual environment.
Correct.
Providing a secure connection, that's a different conversation. That's when you get into VPNs and those setups. But that's by far easier than having to maintain someone's personal device, which is where all this started. Uh, So let me ask you a question related to when we think about BYOD. If you're working with a client and they say, we want to get better at our productivity, we want to get more efficient, we want to reduce our costs, is bring your own device a good idea for us? How do you react to that question?
Well, the first question that I will throw back is, are your user capable of support, or right now you are doing all that support, and how much is that support? No? When you work with companies, yes, it's small and Joe do it and Joe can handle, and let's bring Joe to the meeting and Joe say that's fine. Yeah, go. When you now talk about a more formal IT department, and that Joe is spending hours maintaining this, and Joe is a PC user with an Android phone, works exactly the same. He's a Mac user with an iPhone. I mean, it's not but he's a platform base, is what I'm trying to say. And you now ask him, okay, can we bring all this? And then the face normally, okay, no, I don't have a clue how to support any of those. So you need to understand what is going to be the level of security that you have, and what is going to be the cost of bringing that new technology, how this is going to disrupt your operation. Again, people like me, no problem. Okay, I will figure it out my issues. People who don't have those technical capabilities will want to have those devices, but they will not be able to manage it themselves. So you need to have somebody to manage, and you need to understand that before you open to that. And the second thing is, what is your data? So what I tend to tell people in this answer is, move to the cloud, where your support to device is zero. If your company is still using apps, okay, and you connect to servers, and you are not ready to bring your own device unless your users can handle it. When you are online and you live on the browser, then yeah, bring it, because there is no difference. All the support, the application support, everything that happened will still happen in a browser, and it doesn't matter if the device is an iPad, or it's an Android, or it's a Mac, or it's a PC, or even a Linux. Um, I had a client who they have bring their own PC. They use Salesforce, so everything is on the browser. And somebody was having issues, okay, and the issue was related with Linux. Okay, and the admin called, say, "Do you know anything about Linux?" And say, "Well, depending what you need." And he explained me the story. Say, "No, you're now above what my knowledge is, because this the problem the user were having was not related to Salesforce, was related
Hmm.
to their local machine and their distro." So you need to be aware those things happen, those things are problematic, and what are you going to do with that? The other thing to be very, very aware of is how much the users will be able to bring. So, do you want to establish a limit, or you're going to find the awful users? Me, I told you I'm an awful user. I'm the annoying one who brings a bunch of devices because he likes to change devices and work on multiple. Okay. So, are you going to allow that? Okay. Where now, how you're going to control that, or no, you're going to limit to this, and how are you going to manage those limits? And that is these days easier and easier with Google and Microsoft 365. That is getting easier and easier and easier for the smaller company, but it's still, you need to be very aware what you're going to allow the people to accomplish and do, because otherwise you are going to create a monster that, instead of raise the productivity, it's going to go the productivity the other way. So why, as a company, you are bringing this bring your own device? Why are you going to allow? Is there a real reason of increased productivity? It is a reason, hey, it's what our users are asking. Our users want better hardware, and we buy these standard machines, and they want to buy their own, and we are okay with that. Great.
Mhm.
Then be very aware how is that you want to manage that.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest concern that I have for people who are going through this question. Does it make sense? Is it worthwhile for us to have a BYOD policy? Um, when you start to look at deploying this, or I don't even want to call it deploying because you're not really deploying anything. So it's more like allowing across the border. Uh, because these are open systems, and when I say open systems, it's the user system that's open. You don't really have any control over it. They can install anything they want. It's their device. They can get rid of the device at any time, switch it around. How do you handle something like that? There's a great deal going on. Apple launches a new phone. I go and upgrade the phone. Well, now everything has to be reinstalled. All the configurations have to be updated. Are there glitches in that device? Well, as an IT person, do I care? Because technically that's not my device.
Mhm.
I could be hard about it and say, no, I don't care because it's not my device. But we all know at the end of the day, if somebody can't get their work done, and these are the tools that they have to get their work done, it does become our responsibility because they're, again, unproductive at that point. So we have to take that into consideration. The other piece, though, I think we miss out on, and I wanted to talk about this a little earlier, is this work-life separation. By introducing these things onto your personal device, are you able to draw that line between your when you're doing work things and when you're doing non-work things? Or is work now a 24/7 thing because it's on your personal device? Can you go in and turn off your work email at 8 o'clock on a Saturday because you're going to be out for the evening with some friends? Well, if it's on a work device, you leave the work device behind or you turn it off or whatever. But if it's on a personal device, oh, it's not so easy. You don't have that segmentation unless you make a conscious effort to do that, i.e., invest additional time in understanding your tool, which is the thing that we talk about all the time. Learn your tool. So you wind up having to do things like set up routines and set up automations on your device to be able to go through and lock out certain notifications during certain time periods and things like that. If you truly want to create those walls between. Uh, but if you're not, if you have no interest in doing that, then I always ask, well, do you really need this on your own device? If this is that important, does it not warrant having a device provided for you? And again, some people are like, oh, I don't want two phones and I don't want, well, sorry. If it's that important, you may have to. It may just be part and parcel with it. I've gone through numerous times. I have clients now that have people who are using personal laptops for work because of that's how they were set up before I got there. And I've been going through with them. I said, look, we're going to get you off of the personal laptop. There's no reason for you to be working on your personal laptop. We need you on your own laptop. Because if anything bad happens, I don't want your stuff to blow up. I don't want to have to wipe your machine and rebuild it and you lose the 20,000 kids photos you have on your computer.
Mhm.
So this
And
this line is really important and it's really wiggly and it's really shallow in the sand when we look at it.
it is, and that is the reason I was saying earlier, you need to be very clear and very aware of your own limitations. This has nothing to do with the company. On when I work, I don't do a lot of training on PC or iOS. That is rare, but I do a lot on iOS, and that's one of the first things I teach is how to set up the focus, because that's a way to allow, okay, you know what, when I do home, I want to hide except certain people, all the work notifications. Or when I'm at work, I want to work this way, and when I'm in a different place, I want to work this and this other way. So it is very important to learn to use those tools. Fine, if you are going to bring your own device, learn how you can keep certain things at bay, certain things at the distance, so that way you don't blurry the lines and you don't end up working 24/7. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you want to work 24/7. It matters if you feel you need to work 24/7. When I explain coaching clients, one of the things that we misunderstand when they say, oh, the rat race. No, no, there is a difference. Okay. There is nothing wrong with the wheel, and there is nothing wrong with the rat. The problem is when the rat cannot, or feel that cannot get out of the well. The problem is not the wheel. The wheel is never the
Hmm.
problem. The problem is when you feel, I cannot step out of this wheel. And that is a very real and clear danger when you are working on your personal device all the time.
So I don't want us to be all doom and gloom about this because we both bring our own devices, and I know I have for years, and I have notoriously people who are IT savvy will find the best workarounds for existing policies and procedures to allow them to use their own devices. Yes, we
I'm
all do
admitting
that.
nothing about it. That
Oh no, totally will admit it and am very good at it. That said though, I think one of the things that we can take advantage of in this whole bring your own device mindset is not so much bringing your own device, but it's bringing your learnings from your device. So, for example, if you're using a tool on your own device, like a Todoist, like a Notion, like a Noseby, whatever, and there are certain strategies and approaches that you've applied in that tool that work very effectively for you, and now you cross that border into a work environment where you don't have access to that tool. What are your options? Well, some places you can request, can I get access to this tool? And you'll go through a query routine and you might get it and you might not. I recommend first looking at the tools that you have available and say, okay, how can I do this or as close to this as possible in the tools I have? So, for example, if I'm coming into a Microsoft environment and I may be an Evernote guy, now I look at Microsoft and I'm like, well, I don't have access to Evernote. I can't get to it. They've got it blocked on the web, all this. But I got OneNote. So the things I'm doing in Evernote, can I do them in OneNote? I may be a Notion person using the databases in Notion. And then now I'm in a corporate environment or a business environment, and maybe they have SharePoint. Well, how close can I get? Do I have approaches that I can learn how to do? That to me is the best first step that you can take. Rather than trying to change the playing field completely, can you find ways to improve your productivity and efficiency within the rules as have been defined for you? That said, though, I still will try to find loopholes.
yeah. I was trying to answer without using the do I will
It's
find the
okay.
loopholes. Yes, I can tell story many
It's
years back. Um, and we have an awful system. It was a POP email, and what POP means is at that time was if you download on one device, it disappeared from the server. So I
Mhm,
went to the IT guy who wasn't that great and say, doesn't work. I have, the computer. I have two computers. You can't download them. Well, that's the only thing we can do.
mhm.
Okay. So I hire a little exchange server for me from one user. Okay. Forward the email there. Solve my issue. But yes, I understand that can be problematic. So one of the things I tell people is one is try to understand where IT is coming from. Okay.
Mhm.
Because one of the problems in IT is Doesn't matter the size of the company, multiply the number of people on the company, multiply it by 10, and that's the number of questions they get per day about how can I do this in my device. And it's extremely exhausting for them. Number
Yeah.
two, make friends with them. Okay. Because as the IT guy, it's very annoying when the guy come to your office, Teams, messages, email. Okay. He has never acknowledged you, and now is can I get this done? Oh, hello, I'm human. Okay. So figure out start showing things that you know, so that way that person also have the confidence to let you experiment things, and the third thing is don't ask for the largest thing, start for the small one, show that you can manage that and go. I remember many years ago, I the company used a PC, and there was no reason for me to use a PC. That could be done on a Mac, but the only people with Mac on the offices were the CEO and the high VP level. Everybody else had a PC. So I asked IT, can I bring a Mac? No, we don't have a bring your own device. So, but you have it for phones. Yeah, but we don't have it for computer. Okay.
Hmm.
So what I started paying attention was what the VP of IT was doing with his Mac. And then I noticed as he was struggling with things, how I could help him to solve it, because the IT guy was a PC guy and didn't really
Hmm.
work with Macs that well. So as soon as he understood that I understood Macs and I was capable of, then I got the sign off for my Mac, because he understood now that it was an asset for him, who didn't really understood the Macs very well, had no interest in learning, that somebody with that expertise will be able to help at that level. So my machine has was accepted and completely have access because of that. So take that. And I get it. That is harder in a much larger organization than in a small organization. In this case was a mid-sized organization. But take that into consideration. Think, how will you, if you get that request, how will you act on your area? Okay, if somebody comes and asks you for that same thing you are asking on your area of expertise, how you will react. And normally that way you get a lot more accomplished on your devices than when you just go and request.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of value to building a solid relationship with your IT department, your IT representative. Um, for the most part, I would say in generality, IT is not trying to be the controlled demagogue that they are often portrayed to be.
Oh,
They really just want stuff to work, and they don't want anyone to do anything that's going to break stuff that makes their life more difficult, which is reasonable. They're not trying to prevent you from being successful. They're not trying to prevent you from being productive. They're just trying to make sure that everybody can do their job. And that sometimes requires an understanding of everybody isn't special. And I think that's really the most underlying part of this whole BYOD approach, is that we have this concept that everyone's needs are unique. My needs are special, therefore I'm going to bring my own stuff and you're going to support me. Well, no, I'm willing to bet money that your needs are the same as the other half of the organization, which means you can all work with the same stuff. You may not be thrilled with it. It may it I got into this conversation one time with a client, and they were talking about, deploying laptops and things like that. I said, "Do you know what the two things are that I get the most complaints about from people when it comes to their systems?" I'm like, no. I go, their keyboards and their office chairs. I don't even support their office chairs. But if you want to see somebody lose their mind in an office space, swap their chair with somebody else's. It's actually pretty funny to watch,
it
because they
is.
might they may be visually identical, but as soon as they sit down, they're like, "This is not right. This is not right." And there's that feeling of special. Well, the more devices you introduce with that feeling, this is my device, this is how it should work, this is how the icon should be laid out. Uh, if you've ever had to sit down at somebody else's computer And immediately you look at their desktop and you're going, how do you find anything? They may have a desktop that only has one icon on it, or they may have a desktop that's completely covered in stuff.
Mhm.
All you know at that point in the back of your mind is that's not your desktop. Well, that's the day in the life of every IT person. Every machine they sit down at, every environment they support, they have to deal with this. It's unique. I have to adjust to the uniqueness to get back to that commonality. And BYOD pushes that uniqueness out that much further. Apple's actually fairly forgiving on this stuff because apples are apples pretty much. If you try to support Android devices, oh my goodness, because there's so many different versions of Android and there's so many different flavors of devices and there's so many different flavors of devices within an ecosystem.
Mhm.
You call or ask an IT person, "Hey, can you give me a hand with my phone?" "Yeah, what kind of phone do you have?" "I have a Samsung." You have not narrowed it down by any stretch.
Right.
By any stretch at all. Could be anything. So that becomes a lot of that challenge. And if you're providing your own IT, well, you have just that much more difficulty. So, as I said before, I don't want to downplay the benefits that you can get from bring your own device, but I also don't want to downplay the drawbacks and the potential liabilities if you don't do it without a coherent plan. And this
Correct.
is where I'm going to throw out a little plug here. Uh, if you're thinking about doing a BYOD, if you have a BYOD actively now, or if it's even just a thought in the back of your mind, talk to an IT professional, talk to a coach, talk to Augusto, talk to me. Ask us, what are the vulnerabilities? What are the benefits? How do we make this work? Because if you can look at problems now and solve for them, you won't have to solve for them later. And it makes a huge difference. The last thing you need are annoyed end users.
Not only that, and from the end user perspective, also remember, as you said, your problem is not unique. And there may be a reason. There may be a compliance reason that you are not aware. There may be a support reason. There may be a compatibility issue. There may be a reason why that is not allowed, and why they're doing it in some way. So before, as they say, throw the baby in the water, together, find out what is the reason, find out, why. When I can give an example. I had a client who they only let you connect calendar with Outlook, with the Outlook app. And I asked, well, why? And they say it's compliance issue, because now we control the only place on a bring your own device that information is. And if I wipe out, I wipe out because it's only one. The other one is, okay, now you use the calendar here and there, and I have really hard time getting control out of that. When it's only in Outlook, I can get the logs, I can get the information, I can wipe it out. So understand that. Again, if the IT guy, it's not your enemy. He has an X number of users asking questions that he don't want to answer anymore. Okay. And
Wow.
as a parent, if as a parent, it is like when you have a kid that is two, okay, and he has why,
Hmm.
and you tell him why, because of this. But why? Oh, because of this. But why? And after this fifth why, okay, really what you want to do as a parent is because I said so. Okay.
Hmm.
And that's what tend to happen. Well, as an IT person working in IT, the problem is, again, get that number of employees, multiply it by 5, and that is the number of why they get. And there is a moment that they are simply exhausted about the question, because the other issue is, many times the decision is not theirs. The decision come from somewhere else and said, from
Hmm.
now on, everybody need to use Outlook. Okay. And when you go back and say, but why? There is a memo. Okay. It's not that they wanted to use Outlook or force you in Outlook, or Gmail or whatever. It is that that
Hmm.
was the instruction. And if you ask nicely, they will explain to you why. But if all that they're hearing is that 2-year-old coming in, They can't. So, yes, I agree with you. Bring your own device is awesome. You now get a machine with a keyboard you like, with a screen you want, on the size
Yeah.
you want. Okay. I bring my iPads. I'm very productive on the iPad. I can take notes, screenshots, draw, anything. But remember, as you are doing that, don't forget the other side. Don't forget, if you are bringing all this, you need to be the support, and you need to be kind with the other human, because the other human is not ready to support your device. And that is important. And yes, it is really, really fun to bring your device and to get the new, release, and go and get to the store and now, work in that new toy. Hey, I suffer from new toy syndrome as much or more than the next guy. But just keep that other part
Hmm.
into consideration.
Yeah. Well, I think we've circled around this topic enough. Do you want to close us up for this week?
Yeah. So, as Art says, follow us where you like to listen to podcasts, like us or subscribe to us, and leave us a review. Again, you can interact with us at personalproductivity.club. We have a channel for cross platform. We are Augusto Pinaud on our Gelwicks, and see you next time for your favorite device. Thank you.